Good afternoon. Today is August 28th, 2025, and it's about 6 p.m. Central Time. My name is Reynaldo J. Aguiar Marcano, and I'm recording this video from my home located at the 26714 Valley Side Drive, Katy, Texas 77494. Excuse me. Yeah, so today I just want to talk about a couple of things that that I've been thinking about. And full disclaimer, these things I'm going to mention are theories, right? Like I'm not saying that I have definite proof of this, but I've been doing some data analysis using tools and public data sets that I have at hand. And it seems to me, from a professional point of view, like what I'm going to say is entirely my professional opinion as a data scientist, right? It seems to me like these findings could be statistically significant, meaning these things aren't random. And again, this is a professional assessment I'm giving, right? And but I think ultimately, right, like authorities should investigate these things and engage teams of people qualified on these areas to assess whether this could be the case or not, right? I'm not by any means, I'm not an investigative agency. I don't have the resources, I don't have the equipment, I don't have the technology, I don't have the access to data that authorities have. Therefore, my findings are couldn't hold the same amount of weight, right, as an authority. But I need to say this because if this is the case, this is an enormous threat, right, to national security, to many different things, long term, right? So I want to be very careful how I frame this because it's there's a lot of different topics that will come from this conversation, and I have to think about the implications, right? And I've been thinking about the implications for a couple of days, but it feels like it's a subject that that it doesn't matter how much time I invest thinking of the consequences, I'm not going to be able to grasp the full implications of this, right? Because of the scale. But anyhow, before I start talking about this topic, it's going to be a short video, I promise. But I want to say that for people watching this video, for you to really understand what I'm going to say, I recommend that you watch another video that I recorded before, which is in the channel, that talks about human systems and methods of control of human systems and the 2% attack specifically. Right? This is a signature attack of the PayPal mafia, the 2% attack. And if you watch that video, you will be able, and then listen to what I'm going to go over in this session. You will be able to see what I mean, right? But if you don't watch that video, you will be losing a lot of context, and you may think these claims are fantastic claims, right? That I'm just making this stuff up. So I really recommend people to watch the other video, because that video talks about how this network controls the world, but it's not a mechanism that they apply from the top down. It's the opposite. It's a mechanism that they apply from the bottom up. So they control the world by controlling hyperlocally important points in the world, like important geographical points. When I say points, I mean important geographical points and also important people that, for one reason or another, could hold the keys to something. that it's important to the network. It doesn't mean that these people, not necessarily these people have to be presidents, or they have to be, I mean, yes, they target presidents, but they also target people, from all walks of life. Not necessarily because how much money they have or because they have explicit positions of power, but because they may hold the keys to something, right? Or they may get in the way of an agent getting promoted to a position that is important to the network. So when that happens, they harass that person, right? That is getting in the way, to get them out of the way. And if you do this across the planet, a massive scale, harassing everybody that gets in the way, over time, you control the world, right? So that's the overarching principle. I'm oversimplifying it in this phrasing to to be able to fit in this video, but there's a longer, more detailed explanation, even a hypothetical game that I designed to explain this concept, to show it, to convey how it works. And I didn't come up with this. I observed this because they have been doing this in my immediate surroundings for 20 years. And I have a advantageous point of view because of that. I've been able to observe the patterns, right? So I know how it works. So having said that, about the 2%, there's a few things, right, that I want to say. So the other thing I want to remind people before I go into this path, right, or this train of thought, is that there are certain positions or certain professions that are key to the network. Okay, I can name a few. Software engineering is one. Networking engineering, for obvious reason. Radio frequency engineering, medicine, and law. Okay, not necessarily in that order, but those are 5 very important professions. Okay, and this is something that I've experienced myself. Like, with the medical professionals, if they compromise them or they plant them in the target's path, they could harm the target, right? By either doing medical malpractice intentionally, right? So if I'm in my case, I had a spinal injury, and my doctor, instead of sending me, it was an incapacitated level of pain. But this is another story, right? I don't want to get into that story too much, but my doctor, instead of sending me to pain management, which is, I was crying from the level of pain I was experiencing. What she did is that she sent me to physiotherapy for 4 weeks, which made the injury worse. And I lost all ability to walk. I was bedridden for like 3 months. And this was at the exact precise moment when I was winning the online positions against WebMD in Google search. At that exact moment, right? So when they saw that they had lost the online battle, that I had developed technology to defeat them, they incapacitated me physically, right? And I know these are very serious claims, and like if I'm, I challenge this doctor, right? Sue me for defamation. I invite her to sue me, and her name is Marjorie Broussard from Kelsey Civil. I welcome the lawsuit. Anyhow, so they have these professions, right, that are important to them. Okay, so then the logical step, right, if you are a network that is trying to do what I'm describing, right, to take over the world by controlling hyperlocally points of pressure, either geographical or people, and either way, you do that through means of harassment. Okay, systematic harassment at a scale. And if you know that these professions give you an unfair advantage, because, well, as I explained, with the medical professionals, you can kill a person, right? Or you can torture them, or you can induce stress, or you can medicate them, right? And render them and disable them that way. Like, you can do all sorts of things. You can make them look unreliable, right? If they want to testify. You can do many things. You can extract information to blackmail them. right? You can alter their test results, right, and do something in the results, put something in the results that would discredit them. I mean, I can get creative, right, of all the things that you can do. With lawyers, right, lawyers eventually could become judges and could become mediators. Right? And with that, you can control the legal system. And having control of the legal system, even if it's not a formal way of control, but an indirect way of control like the one I'm describing, by controlling key individuals in the legal system, you can control the outcomes of the legal processes, right? Particularly if you control the judge that decides which judge will get which case, because that way you can make sure that you route the cases that are involving your target to the right judge, right? So these are professions that definitely give an unfair advantage because they give direct control over situations that could be life-altering to the target. So they have to control these professions, okay? One way to do that, of course, is by, there's many ways you can do it. And, you know, they don't pick one, they do many things in parallel, right? But if you want to take control of one of these systems right now, in this moment, you don't have control. Assume for a second that you don't have control. This is a new country that just came up from water in the middle of the ocean. It wasn't there anymore. And it's full of people. And it has professionals inside of that country. But you don't control any of them, right? So the first thing you would do is try to control the doctors and the lawyers, right? That's the first step that you would take. And the software engineers and the electrical engineers that control the power grid, like Centerpoint. Like, in fact, they have a Centerpoint truck park outside of my home in this very moment. Because they did this because I sent the data bomb to two important agents that have more than 10 million points in Katy, in the Elon Musk database. They're marked with more than 10 million points. One of the agents was John Taylor J. Felina, Felina being the cat marker. Felina in Spanish is like a female cat, right? They're so obvious. It's not. This is getting so easy for me that it's not even entertaining anymore. And the other one is Balu, B-A-L-U, Vasanath. Vasant, B as in Victor, A-S-A, N as in Nicole, T-H. 5 minutes after I sent them the book through Amazon, they parked that truck in front of my house, right? In front of the antenna specifically, right? I think they think that I'm going to think that they're going to intercept the antenna with that, which is silly. I know that's not the way it works, right? Because if the vehicle is static, that vehicle is going to get signals from anywhere, right? They have to be moving the vehicle at a constant speed at the exact moment there is a network event in my home for the vehicle to be able to catch the signature, to isolate it, right, geographically. So I know that the vehicle being parked there is going to do nothing because the antenna is well covered. So, you know, I could turn on the antenna. The only reason why I'm not turning on the antenna for this session is because the bandwidth is too, because I have it positioned and covered in such intricate way that the bandwidth is very narrow, very small. And for video, the video gets degraded. So the audio and the video gets messed up. So that's why I'm not using it, but not because I'm scared of the truck, just to make that clear. But anyhow, so if this new country pops out of nowhere, full of people, you will try to control the software engineers, the electrical engineers that maintain the electrical grid, the teachers, of course, the school district, if you can, and the software engineers, the lawyers, and the doctors, right, for obvious reasons, and the teachers, especially the preschool teachers, and the principals in those schools. So, so one way to do that, right? There's different ways to do that. One is by using money, brute forcing the problem, right? So you pay them, you take each one of these people you want, and you offer them $2 million in cryptocurrency. You know, somebody who's making $60,000 a year, you offer them $2 million, they're probably going to say yes, right? And if you have to control, say, this way, 500 people multiplied by $2 million, is roughly $1 billion. That's nothing for them, right? Because they get the money through the drug trade via Diosdado Cabello. So $1 billion is nothing, right? And they don't pay taxes on that money anyways. So it's not that difficult, right, to brute force it. But this doesn't work long term. This only has an immediate effect because, well, that agent, as long as they have the $500,000, the $1 million, whatever you gave them, right, they will do what you say. But when they run out of money, they will want more money, right? So it's not a strategy that scales to say 40, 50, 60 years, right? Which is the time frame they're thinking about. They want not only to conquer the world, but they want their children to rule the world as well, right? It's a generational thinking what they apply. So this doesn't work, right? So what you have to do, and this is where the idea came to my mind, right? And by the way, one of the reasons why they're doing this thing with the planes, and like the planes are basically circling my house at this point, is because they want to figure out how, if somebody's telling me these things, right? But anyhow, so I realized this is how it came to my mind, right? I realized that this approach of brute forcing things with money, even if they control all the drug trade in the world, doesn't scale like long term to 40, 50, 60 years. It doesn't scale that long, right? It scales in the short term, but it doesn't scale in the long term, time-wise. So that's the problem they're trying to solve. And think about it. How do you solve this problem? Well, I mean, there could be many ways to do it, right? I mean, you could damage the entire profession, right? You could lower this is what they did in Venezuela. They lowered, in Cuba, they lowered the barrier of entry, right? So back in the 80s in Venezuela, and I know this because I was born in that country, to become a doctor, and my dad is a doctor. He graduated, I think, in the year 78, something like that. So around that time, to become a doctor, it was like a 6 years career in the university, and then you have to do something they call the residency, which was 1 year in a rural area. It was very difficult. It would take you 7, 8 years to become a doctor. So what Diosdado Cabello did and Hugo Chavez is that they lowered that, right? So what they did, they created like I don't know how to translate it in English, but the translation would be like an accelerated training program for doctors, in which you basically, after you graduate from high school, if you go to this special school they created, this is really a special school. I imagine they have courses about microplastics and viruses and things like that. If you go to this special school, you become a doctor in 2 years. 2 years. So by the age of 20, you could be a practicing doctor in Venezuela. Of course, this way, you can control the entire professional circle very quickly, right? Long term. So that's one solution. But this is likely not going to fly in countries like the US or Switzerland or, developed countries, right? So how do you solve that problem? Was the question that I had in my mind this morning. Actually, like yesterday. This occurred to me. I took a nap. Sometimes this happens, right? Like I'm thinking about something, I take a nap. I don't know the answer, but I take a nap, and when I wake up, magically, I know the answer. Or I think I know, like I have an idea that could solve that question, that problem. So this is the idea that I woke up to yesterday. Well, one solution is to make sure that the children of your agents get into these professions. That's the solution, right? It's the cheapest, most effective, and most long-term solution. If you can assure that the children of your most convenient agents control these professions in 5 years or in 6 years from now. So the question becomes, how do I get all these children that may not be the top of the class, right? For different, I'm not saying how do I want to be very careful here because I don't want to discriminate against anybody, right? I don't want to say that anybody's more capable. It's not. But let me tell you an experience that I had, okay? This is something that I observed firsthand, okay? I'm going to talk about Penelope Suarez, who's an agent, prominent, very connected to, via her dad, to Diosdado Cabello. She came to the US, right? And she has a son, Andres, right? And Andres is an agent. He came to install a device in my internet in 2023, right? And he's a kid. Like he was at the time maybe 19 years old, right? which I think is a worse crime, like getting your own. But of course, I see it that way because I'm on the other side, right? But from my perspective, from my shoes, it feels like that's the worst crime you can commit, like getting your child who's 18, 19 years old to work for Diosdado Cabello. Right? In my mind, that's the worst possible thing you can do. But I understand that if I was an agent, I would probably see that as helping my child, because if Diosdado Cabello helped me get to where I am, financially, socially, whatever, he could help my child, right? So the observation I have with Andres is that when Penelope came to the country, Andres was in a school, and then he went to high school. And I never met Andres in person, but I heard about him almost every day, right? Because we ran together and she talked about him. So what was surprising to me was that after Andres graduated from high school, he decided that he was not going to go to college, that he was going to work for Aspen, which is one of these contractor companies that work for Comcast. And that's why he came to install that device in my internet, in my connection box. But that's not what's surprising. Many kids, I've seen this, right? Many kids get attracted to the prospect of making money after high school, and they go on to take technical careers or métiers, they would call them in French, like things that you learn how to do, but you don't necessarily go to school to learn how to do them, right? And you can get a relatively high income this way very early on in your life and buy a car. And these are things that are attractive to kids, right? So I know that this is a viable path, okay? I'm not discounting the validity of this. But what I couldn't, understand was how she, as a parent, didn't do anything to change that, particularly being from Venezuela, because in Venezuela, culturally, we have this, I mean, maybe this is a third world country culture, right? I understand that. But culturally, we believe that if you don't go to college, you will not get anywhere in life. That's the belief in Venezuela, okay? And this has to do with socioeconomical situations and historical situations that happened back in the country, okay? So if you are Venezuelan and you have a child, you want your child to go to school and to go to college and to go to university and to eventually become either an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer. There's a certain set of professions that you will want your child to be, because those professions have the higher income in that country, okay? And the higher reputational status, I would say. I don't know if it's the same in the US. I think it is, right? Like, when you meet a lawyer, you say, oh, this guy's a lawyer. When you meet a doctor, well, this guy is a doctor, right? And there's this joke in some of the TV series where, dentists call themselves doctors, and then the doctor says that they're not really doctors, right? But anyhow, what was odd to me was seeing that Penelope let her child go through this path of basically quitting on the possibility of even going to college to dedicate his life to installing cable connections, right? But I understand now the reason. It was a deliberate choice, right? And it's because she herself, what she learned from Diosdado Cabello and from the network, is that there are easier ways to make money than to go to college and to get an education and to do hard work. There are easier ways, like working for Diosdado Cabello. So, of course, she wanted her son to have an easier life, right? I mean, that I can understand. So I guess I'm saying all this because if you raise a child with that mindset, right, that education is not important because there are easier ways, probably your child is not going to be in the top of the class, right? I mean, I think that's a safe assumption to make. Because that's what the child is learning at home, right? That hard work is not the way to do it, right? That investing time, effort, sweat and tears into something is not what wise people do. What wise people do is to spy for Diosdado Cabello. So, but back to the original conversation, right? I'm just trying to paint a picture, a socio-economical or like a psychological profile of this society, right? To make the point, or to convey the point that I think probably the kids raised in this environment are not going to be in the top of the class. The probability, I mean, maybe there's some of them that are super smart, and despite this, what I would consider a negative message at home, they do make it to the top of the class, right? That's possible. But in general, in normal conditions, these kids are at a disadvantage. And if you think about it for a second, what I'm saying is another way of describing the communist paradox. It's the same thing. Is this criminal mechanism of gaining advantages? Diosdado Cabello does it by stealing information, by surrounding people in their homes, by intercepting their cell phones, their emails, their satellite communications, right? But what he's really doing is getting an unfair advantage. I mean, that's the bottom line. He's getting possession of something that he should not have had in the first place. And he's using the possession of that thing to get an unfair advantage over everybody else, right? But that makes it, and then the people that he promotes within his organization are people that are good at that. And precisely because of that, because the only skill they have is how to steal information in this case, they're not good at what they do. And the society decays over time, right? That's the communist paradox that I described in the book. So what I'm describing with the kids and how they are really at a disadvantage. I mean, but of course, I realize this is it's a question of perspective, right? From my perspective, I see them as kids, as vulnerable kids, really, right? Because they were not raised in environments that would prepare them for real life. But from the shoes of Penelope, she would see her son as a lucky child, right? That was born into this privileged environment where everything is easy, if you steal, for Diosdado Cabello. So to paint that picture, right? What I'm saying is that probably these kids don't have the higher chances of getting to the top of the class in high school. Now, if assume for a second that's the case, how are going these kids to get into law school, med school, computer science at Stanford and the MIT? And like, it's unlikely. And there's another problem, which is the cost of those educations, at least in the US. Those educations are not free and are very expensive, right? But we'll get to that in a second. But assume that, as it is, right, the money is not a problem for this network and for the prominent agents in this network. Assume that for a second. They have the problem that the kids are not going to organically get into the schools that they want them to get to be able to control those professions in 6 years when they graduate. And then as they progress in their careers, and eventually these kids will become judges, district judges, court supervisors, chief of a staff in medical chains like Kelsey Siebel. Some of them might become lawmakers, right? Some of them may become governors. One of them could become president. It's really a numbers game. Is how many of your people, and now I'm talking about the collective network. The question for Xi Jinping and the leaders of this organization is, how many of my people I can get into these advantageous positions early on, right? Now, we're going to talk about a little bit of recent history in the US. There was a case recently, maybe 2 years ago, in which there was a group of parents that they were cheating on the admission process. I don't know the details, I don't follow. These people were celebrities. Like, I think some of the, or one of the, I don't recall the show name, the housewives of some place, right? You know, this series where they have the housewives that are super rich, and one of them was involved in this. And there were other prominent people, right? And they were basically rigging the admission system of a set of important colleges in the US. So their kids would get into these schools because their kids wouldn't make it organically, right? So they had to intervene. But anyhow, they got caught. It was a corruption case, basically. They got caught, and there were indictments. I don't know. I had to research this to really understand what happened. But this was the thing, okay? So that's one way to do it, right? You could recruit in your network the admission officials of all these schools, which they probably, I mean, not all of them, but they probably have some of them, right, within the network. But this doesn't scale universally, right? But now think about this for a second. If you have an area like Katy, Texas, that is heavily under your control, you have 50,000 families of your network living in this place. It seems to me like the choice is obvious, right? What you have to do instead of, and this is network theory 101, right? What you have to do is, instead of manipulating the admission system, you manipulate the inputs to the admission system. That's the key. It's the cheapest, easiest, more scalable way to do it, and also the harder to detect. What I mean is, in the US at least, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about the US because people from other places might watch this video and may not understand what I'm saying. In the US, there is this thing that is basically a set of standardized tests that students take at the end of high school when they're on their senior year. And this is one of the major inputs to the admission process. One of them is the SAT, right? This is a test that everybody takes, and they have a standardized scoring system. Everybody gets more or less the same questions. They randomize them, they change the order, but the questions, the difficulty of the questions is standardized in scientific way, trying to give everybody a level playing field. And then this number is what the admissions offices look at in conjunction with other things like an essay, the profile of the students, the parents. They look at many different things, and every school has different criteria. But the SAT is a major thing, right? Like their careers, like if you want to go for computer science in Stanford, you have to have an SAT over a certain number. I don't know what the number would be these days, but there is a number. And if you don't have that number, you cannot even apply, right, for admission. Or you can apply, but it's going to get denied, right? So it seems to me that one of the ways could be, and this is a theory again, but one of the ways could be manipulating the inputs to the admissions, because that way you are indirectly controlling the admissions to all the schools in a single point. If you think about this, it's the same strategy as manipulating Google search results via Wikipedia, right? Yes, they could have taken all the engineers at Google, and they have engineers at Google, a lot of them, but you know, it would be obvious, and there's an investigation, the code will tell what they did, right? It's easier, cleaner, and more scalable to manipulate Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is an input to Google search. It's the same principle. You manipulate the inputs, you don't manipulate the system. And if something gets uncovered, then what goes down is the input. Wikipedia goes down, right? Like, I mean, the FBI, goes against Wikipedia. That could happen, but Google is untouched, and then they will then go and work in a different input. Yeah, I think the video is gonna getting messed up. Well, I'll continue. If not, I'll record again the video. So, right. So this led me to do certain data experiments that I did. Looking at, well, first of all, right, it's obvious that the schools in the Katy ISD, the Katy School District, have an unusually high score. So the schools in the US are ranked by a certain score that is derived from the standardized test, mostly. Like there's other factors, but a big factor is how well the students did in the SATs and other standardized tests. And all the schools in the US are ranked by these numbers, right? So if you look at schools in, for example, Palo Alto, California is a community that is full of super educated people, because those are the people that work as software engineers in companies like Apple, Google, Facebook, like all the big tech companies that dominate the world. The top talent is in Palo Alto, California, and Mountain View. These are towns that are very close together. And if you look at those schools has scores around 5 out of 10. And who the parents are is important because of the same train of thought I was explaining before. So, if you have Chinese parents who are smart software engineers that go to the top of their profession in Google, they are going to educate their child, or their children, sorry, in a way that is consistent with what they did in life, with their own life, right? So they're going to educate them and to teach them and train them to work hard and to really think about the problems they face. The opposite of what Penelope Suarez did with Andres, right? And yet, these schools that are filled with this offspring of these top talent families have scores between 5 out of 10 and 6 out of 10. The best schools are 6 out of 10. Well, the schools in Katy, all of them are either 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. Right? Like the scores they blow Palo Alto out of the water. And the same observation happens with places like Boston, right? Like where the MIT is, or if you look at any academic hub in the US, the schools have scores that are consistently lower than the Katy ISD schools. And yes, you can make the argument, well, is that Katy, these people are special. I mean, they are geniuses. It's a community of geniuses, really. And the genes just got into the kids. And also the superintendent of Katy ISD is a luminaire and has designed an educational program that nobody in the history of humanity over, I don't know, 700, 800 years, nobody thought of teaching people in this way as he's doing, right? That's an explanation. The other explanation is, well, somehow they're cheating on the SATs, right? Or in the standardized tests, or in the scoring system of these schools, because the score of the school is important, because the admission offices look at that as well. They don't only look at the child, they look at where was the child educated, what's the reputation of this school, because the kid could come with A grades, but from a terrible school, that tells you nothing, right? But if the kid comes with A grades from a school that is ranked 9 out of 10 nationally, you will stop and look at the application. Anyhow, so that's the theory. The good news, I think, this is trivial to detect. The detection of this is trivial, right? To test if this is the case. So I'm just going to give some ideas that, after I started thinking about this problem, came to my mind. There might be other ways to do it, right? Particularly if you work for the FBI, you may have access to things that I can only even imagine that they exist, right? But with the tools I have, if I had access to the data, I would look at, well, I would start by looking at the geo index of Elon Musk, ranking them by the spy hell score that my system computes, and it's free and available to anybody. So look at the agents in Katy and get the list of the top agents by score, right? That's your first seed, that's your first list of candidates. Now, from that list, eliminate the ones that don't have kids, or that have kids that are too small, that are not in high school age. But don't eliminate the ones that have kids that are already in college, like Maria Alejandra and Angel Vargas da Costa, because their child is already in going to veterinarian school, because it's important to have veterinarians so you can kill the puppies, right? And the reason why I'm saying this is documented in the website. They killed 2 of my puppies with the veterinarians. It's another way to introduce stress into the target's life. So in their case, if you look at them, they have high score, but they don't have any kids in high school, because the kid already is in college. But you also need to look at those cases, right? So after you have that list of prominent agents, concentrate on the prominent agents only, okay? Because this will let you see if there's a statistical significance on this. Now, of the prominent agents, look at the SAT scores of the children, right? And is it that all of them got over 1,200, right? How do they compare to the national averages as a group, right? And also, how do they compare as a group to the other kids that are children of non-prominent agents in Katie? The theory here is that the ranking in the organization might give the child access to better opportunities. This might be a perk of employment for the parents. If you work for the network, your child might go to Stanford and may get into one of these 5 professions that are important to us: software engineering, networking, electricity, medical/veterinarians, dentists, and law. Okay, and that guarantees that your child will make millions of dollars. I mean, who will not want that for their children, right? And for their own good, because think about it, right? It's an unavoidable truth in life that we are all getting older, right? And eventually we're going, all of us, to be at an age where we cannot work anymore. But if your child is a millionaire, that's not only good for the child, it's also good for the old you in 30 years from now, because you're going to be the father of a millionaire, right? When you're old. So there could be a selfish, more than the altruistic motivation. There could also be a bit of a selfish motivation, right? But anyhow, I think it's a perk, right? And my theory is that the more prominent the agent is, the better the school the child gets, and the better scores in the SAT, and the better opportunities in life early on, right? Anecdotically, I remember once, maybe 5 years ago, I don't know if I think they didn't really do it, but like 5 years ago, I was at Maria Alejandra's house with my former partner, and the child, who was then senior in high school, was talking about that she wanted to go to school in London, and that she had looked at this school in London, and the parents were supportive of sending her to London, UK, to go to this very expensive school. I don't know if it was Oxford, it was something like that. It was something. I heard of the conversation. I didn't know if they were delusional or if they were secret millionaires, right? Because the setup they were describing, I can't do the math. That would cost easily $300,000 per year, right? What they were describing in that room. And Maria Alejandra is an assistant, or was an assistant teacher in the KDISD school, of course, because the KDISD is an important piece of this network for the future, right? So Maria Alejandra, being a chemical engineer, she works as an assistant teacher in the KDISD. And Penelope Suarez has a friend who's a veterinarian who's also a teacher in another school district. This is a thing. This is how they control the school districts. They get people that are not really teachers, but somehow they found a loophole to get them in, right? So anyhow, they were describing sending this child to Oxford, something along those lines, right? that clearly was outside of their means, given their declared professions, right? Maria Alejandra is an assistant teacher. In Katie, an assistant teacher could maybe make $50,000, I think, before tax. She still have to pay taxes, right? So she could end up having $30,000 a year in her pocket. And the husband is an engineer who was supposedly struggling to find work in Houston and was traveling to Louisiana every day. It's like a 3 hours trip back and forth to be able to work. I don't know how much he could make in Louisiana, but assume that he was making $100,000 per year. But then he was making this 6 hours trip every day. That costs money, right? So say that he could end up having $60,000 a year in his pocket, plus 30,000 of Alejandro is 90. How they're going to pay $200,000 for this kid to go to Oxford, right? With tuition, boarding, insurance, all those expenses together is probably right around that figure. But they were considering doing it, right? I think the answer to that is because it's a perk. First, they knew that maybe she could get in because they had a way to get her in. And secondly, they had a way to pay for it, right? That outside of the regular income, because otherwise they wouldn't be thinking about it. Like if Marcelo was going to university, I wouldn't think to send him to Oxford because I cannot afford it. Like there's no way I can afford that. So I wouldn't even have the thought, is what I'm saying. So anyhow, I think that's the idea, right? That somehow, possibly, they could be collectively tricking the admission systems, plural, as a way to assure that the offspring of the prominent agents get into these professions that are important to the network as a means of controlling those professional circles forever. Right? It's all about giving an unfair advantage to a group of people that are part of your team. Right? That's the key. That's the thinking. It's a collective thinking. Now, there's something I want to talk about here. I'm going to make a parenthesis, right? Because like I don't know how these things work in the world. Like if this information gets to the right people, what would they do with it? Right? That's a question I ask myself. One possibility, obvious, is okay. If I were them, I would try to protect these professions. Right? I would try to make sure that the bar of Texas is not under the control of the network anymore, and that the Medical Association of Texas is not under the control of the network anymore. But I think that is not the right solution. I think that is not a long-term solution, and I want to elaborate of why. Okay. But before I do that, to drive the point home, the methods for detecting this are cross-referencing the information in the GeoIndex by score with the SAT scores of the kids. And also by the chosen profession of the kids that already went to college or are in college. Because I think that, for example, somebody who's a prominent agent will want their child to be either a doctor, a veterinarian, or a lawyer, rather than an electrician, right? So to see if there is a statistical significance in those choices of career compared to the scores in Elon Musk's GeoIndex. Right? It's trivial to detect this. Right? Now, I want to talk a little bit about why I think it would be the wrong choice to try to protect those professions. I mean, yes, if I was a person working in that problem, I would protect the professions. I would, because they're dangerous. They could kill people with this, right? But it's not the long-term solution, and I want to elaborate on why. And to do that, I'm going to recount something that happened maybe 3 years ago when I was doing this, the same thing I'm doing today, debugging. What I'm doing is debugging the society. This is what I'm doing, right? But 3 years ago, I was debugging the queries in Google because they were attacking the queries to suppress my website. And I don't want to get too much into the technical details to not derail the conversation, but at the time, the main contention point was the query, or one of the main contentions. There were several, but one of the big ones was the query key opinion leaders, which is the name of my company, because they wanted to suppress the company name. So if anybody searched for the company, they could not find it. Right? So I started developing technology to counteract their attacks, and I was successful at that, and that's when they incapacitated me physically, right? When I succeeded. But one of the things that they did at some point, and this is a very interesting observation, okay? And please bear with me. I know it may sound like a parallel that could not be made, but I feel like it's there, right? So this is what they did, right? When they saw that they could not win the query, that I had developed the technology to fight them, what they did is that they changed the interpretation of the query in Google. And this is a very deep concept of warfare, what I'm going to say, what they did, right? So what they did was that they started using their automated systems and maybe even their real agents to issue millions of clicks, right? To a point where if you search in Google for key opinion leaders, Google would suggest to you, will tell you, did you mean opinion leadership instead of key opinion leaders? Opinion leadership is a query that nobody searches for, right? And what they really want was to suppress my company name. So it really makes no sense that they did that. But think about it for a second, right? I mean, it makes sense because they were suppressing the company because they were changing the query, right? But think about the foundational thinking of what they did. What they did was, so you have the technology to protect that query. Well, we're going to attack a different query and make that query be the query, right? That way, you will have to have twice the number of servers to protect the two queries. And if you protect that query, we're going to change it again to a third query. And you see where this is going. It's a whack-a-mole game. I cannot be running behind them, protecting every single query. There are millions of queries that they could change it to, right? They would win in that situation, okay? What I'm describing, there is an immediate parallel to this problem of the professions. Why? Well, because right now, they're using their 2% attack to control these, say, 5 important professions, okay? And they're controlling the world by controlling these 5 professional circles in the 2 top % of societies or systems, right? And that's fine. But I want to raise awareness to people that eventually might watch this information, that they could as well control the world in a different way, but using the same underlying principle. They could change the query of the professions as well. Let me give you an example of what that looks like, okay? Imagine that the free world starts protecting these 5 professions using legislation and enforcement and penalties and jail time and things like that. What they will do, and I'm saying will because I've seen them do this before, particularly with the queries, what they will do is that they will say, oh, that's what you're going to do. Okay, so now we're going to take all our people or all our coordination capabilities, and we're going to take all the secretaries in the world. Think about it for a second. If you control 100% of the secretaries in the entire planet, you control the planet. Because you control the flow of information, the schedules, the meetings of all the important people. So it's not so much about which professions. I mean, yes, these 5 professions give them an unfair advantage, and that's a key point right now. But I want to be very clear that they could do exactly the same thing with one profession, and one profession that is not that powerful, like a secretary. If they have them all, they control the world as well. So it's not so much about the profession. It's not the profession that needs to be, it's not the compromised professional circle what needs to be dismantled. What needs to be dismantled and protected against is the capability of coordinating large groups of individuals in the same profession, right? As they were coordinating large group of clicks in the same query. Is the concentration of the pressure point the technology, really? It's not the profession. That the technology has little to do with the profession, and what it really has to do with is with the capability of coordinating large group of people spread geographically across the planet in a single pressure point. That is the key. And the pressure point is a profession, whatever the profession they choose. But they may choose a different profession. They could control the world by controlling all the mechanics in the US, all the auto repair shop mechanics. If they control them all, they would control the country, because they could paralyze everybody if they want to, right? So I wanted to give that heads up that yes, I mean these professional vehicles need to be put under control because they're dangerous, as we've seen, right? Like look where my child is, right? But that's not the end solution long term in 20, 30, 40 years, right? Because they will just change the query, so to speak. So I think this is a good point to stop this session. Yes. Yes. This is a good point to stop this session. And I'll keep working on the books. I've been putting a lot of effort into making them professionally, like look professional, really. Like I have to learn all these things about book publishing that I didn't know, and encode that knowledge into a system that allows me to internationalize these books quickly, right? Because I want to deploy this knowledge across the planet. So I'll keep working on that. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. And one important thing, this more on the ground thing. So the call mobile, because I've been strengthening my security measures, right? So one of those, the call mobile, it now has several of those outdoor cameras, blink, right? I'm mentioning this in case authorities ever watch this video and they decide to follow or are following, I don't know, the situation on the streets. These cameras could be a weapon, because Blink has this feature that you can refresh a thumbnail in the cameras, right? It has a button. I see a button in my UI. If I click on that, the camera basically takes a picture, right? And I imagine that federal authorities could have the capability of triggering this if they see my vehicle close to an agent that they know is important. So all you have to do, if you want to take a picture of the agent, is leverage my cameras by sending the command to the cameras with whatever technologies or means of control that you have. I would send the command to the cameras to take a still, right, of that agent. And the cameras now have a streaming internet. I bought a hotspot. I realized they're going to intercept the hotspot and they're going to track me with that. But at this point, I mean, they track me anyway. So it makes really no practical difference, right? So I'm going to have that internet enabled, and the cameras are going to be live, and they have night vision as well. So if you are interested in taking pictures of these agents that are following me, please go crazy. Like, the cameras are there. I mean, I put them there for my safety, but feel free to leverage them. They're there, right? So you can trigger the stills if you want and take the pictures, right? Just an idea. I don't mean to overstep or tell anybody what to do. But if I was working on that problem, that's what I would do, right? I would take the pictures that I want, right? Not the pictures that Ronaldo wants to take, right? Or that Blink decides to take, because they also have people in Blink, and they may control which pictures are taken, right? So I guess what I'm saying is it's important who gets there first, right? blink. Okay. Yeah, so I think this is important. And tonight I'm going to run a field test with the Call Mobile and the cameras to see how they work. Okay, so I'm going to be doing that tonight in a couple of hours. Well, thank you so much again for your time, and it's August 28th, 7 p.m. Central Time. Goodbye.